It's June 1972. We are in a swanky, sun-drenched villa at the Newporter Inn in Newport Beach, California. Outside, the palm trees are swaying. But inside, all hell has broken loose. A 53-year-old woman is barricaded in her hotel room. She is terrified, desperate, and trying to make a phone call to the press that could change the entire course of American history. But the man in the room with her, a former FBI agent assigned to protect her, isn't going to let that happen. He lunges. He rips the telephone cord straight out of the wall. The woman screams and fights back. She's kicking, she's clawing, but he's stronger. He pins her down. He drags her across the room. Soon, another man enters. They hold her down, and a doctor plunges a needle full of tranquilizers into her hip. This isn't a scene from a mob movie. This is not a Cold War spy thriller. The woman on the floor is Martha Mitchell. She is the wife of the Attorney General of the United States. And the men holding her down? They work for the president. They are about to orchestrate one of the most vicious, unhinged smear campaigns in political history, all to convince the world that Martha Mitchell is absolutely out of her damn mind. But here is the craziest part. She wasn't crazy. She was completely 100% right. Welcome back to Audacious History, the channel where we dig into the wildest, most unbelievable true stories from America's past. If you caught our last video in this political playlist, you already know about the absolute chaos gremlin that was G. Gordon Liddy. Well, today we are staying in the Watergate cinematic universe, but we are shifting our focus to a woman who has been criminally overlooked by history books. This is the story of Martha Mitchell. You may have heard her name in passing, or maybe you saw Julia Roberts play her on TV recently. But the sanitized version of Watergate usually focuses on the men: Woodward and Bernstein, John Dean, Richard Nixon. They leave out the part where the administration literally held a cabinet member's wife hostage, beat her, drugged her, and then ran a massive media campaign to gaslight the entire country into thinking she was a delusional alcoholic. Today, we are going to talk about the kidnapping of Martha Mitchell, the original woman who was gaslighted by the US government, and a psychological phenomenon that is literally named after her. Let's get audacious. To understand why the Nixon administration was so terrified of Martha Mitchell, you have to understand who she was. Martha Elizabeth Beale was born in 1918 in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. She was a Southern belle through and through, charismatic, loud, deeply theatrical, and completely incapable of keeping her mouth shut. After a failed first marriage, she met a wealthy, stoic, pipe-smoking New York lawyer named John Mitchell. They got married in 1957. John Mitchell was essentially the polar opposite of Martha. He was dour, secretive, and ruthless. But they were obsessed with each other. And John Mitchell just so happened to be the law partner and best friend of a guy named Richard Milhouse Nixon. When Nixon decided to run for president in 1968, he asked John Mitchell to be his campaign manager. John agreed, and when Nixon won, John was appointed Attorney General of the United States. He was Nixon's most trusted advisor. Nixon called him the Big Enchilada. And with that, Martha Mitchell arrived in Washington, D.C. Now, the Nixon White House was notoriously paranoid, secretive, and gray. The women were expected to be quiet, supportive, and invisible. Pat Nixon, the First Lady, was nicknamed Plastic Pat because she never broke protocol and never expressed a controversial opinion. And then, into this stuffy, repressed environment kicks Martha Mitchell. Martha was a force of nature. She wore bright colors, she drank heavily, she loved the spotlight, and she loved to talk. And the press absolutely adored her. They called her the mouth of the South. She was the most famous woman in Washington, constantly appearing on the covers of magazines and on talk shows. She was more popular than Nixon himself, which, as you can imagine, pissed the president off to no end. But her real weapon was the telephone. Martha had this habit of having a few drinks in the evening, picking up the phone, and calling reporters, like Helen Thomas from UPI, in the middle of the night. She would gossip. She would complain about politicians. She would leak little bits of information. At first, the Nixon administration thought it was cute. They used her to float conservative talking points. But soon, Martha started going off script. She started criticizing the Vietnam War. She started criticizing corrupt politicians. And worst of all, she started snooping. By 1971, John and Martha Mitchell had moved into a luxurious duplex at the Watergate complex in D.C. Yes, that Watergate. Nixon was gearing up for his 1972 re-election campaign. John Mitchell stepped down as Attorney General to head up the committee for the re-election of the president, hilariously and appropriately abbreviated as CREEP. CREEP was a cesspool of dirty tricks, illegal fundraising, and espionage. They hired ex-CIA and ex-FBI guys, like our old friend G. Gordon Liddy, to spy on political opponents, sabotage campaigns, and plug leaks in the press. They called themselves the Plumbers. One of the guys working for CREEP was a former CIA operative named James McCord. He was officially hired as the security director for the campaign, but McCord also worked closely with the Mitchell family. He drove their daughter to school. He acted as Martha's personal bodyguard. Martha liked him. She trusted him. But Martha wasn't stupid. She noticed that the men hanging around her husband were shady. She noticed that John was having secretive, hushed meetings in their Watergate apartment. Being Martha, she would literally hide behind doors and eavesdrop on her husband's conversations. She started looking at the campaign's paperwork. She realized that CREEP was involved in massive illegal activities, including an elaborate scheme of political espionage. She began telling John that he needed to get out. She told him that these men, including Nixon, were going to ruin him. She even threatened to call her reporter friends and expose the whole dirty operation if John didn't quit. The Nixon administration was terrified of her. They knew Martha Mitchell held the keys to their destruction, and they knew she had a direct line to every major journalist in the country. They needed to handle her. They needed to shut her up. And in June of 1972, they finally got their chance to do it. In mid-June 1972, John and Martha Mitchell traveled to California for a series of campaign fundraising events. They checked into a beautiful suite at the New Porter Inn. Martha was in her element, enjoying the sunshine and the attention. But on the night of June 17, 1972, halfway across the country in Washington, D.C., 5 men broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex. They were caught red-handed by the police. And one of the men arrested was James McCord, Martha's friend, her bodyguard, and the security director for her husband's campaign. When John Mitchell got the phone call in California at 6:00 a.m., he panicked. The cover-up had to start immediately. If the press connected the burglars to CREEP and CREEP to him, the Nixon campaign would be destroyed. John had to get back to Washington right away to manage the fallout. But he couldn't bring Martha. If Martha found out that her beloved bodyguard, James McCord, had been arrested for breaking into the DNC, she would instantly connect the dots. She knew too much about CREEP. She would call the press. She would blow the entire cover-up before it even started. So John Mitchell did something completely unforgivable. He told Martha he had urgent business in D.C. and left her behind in California. But before he left, he pulled aside their head of security, a former FBI agent named Steve King. John gave King a very specific, chilling order. Under no circumstances is Martha Mitchell to know what happened in Washington. Do not let her see a newspaper. Do not let her watch the news. And whatever you do not let her use the damn telephone. John Mitchell then got on a plane and abandoned his wife to her captors. Okay, I need you to put yourself in Martha's shoes for a second. You're a cabinet wife. You're in a luxury hotel. Your husband just bolted out the door for a mysterious emergency, and suddenly the security guard who is supposed to be protecting you is acting like a prison warden. For the first day or two, Martha was just annoyed. Steve King and the other security men wouldn't let her leave the room. They intercepted her room service. They took the newspapers. But Martha was smart. She knew something was up. On June 22nd, she managed to get her hands on a copy of the Los Angeles Times. She saw the headline. She saw James McCord's name. The puzzle pieces clicked into place instantly. Martha realized her husband was running a criminal syndicate out of the White House and that the president was involved. She was furious. She picked up the phone and dialed her favorite reporter, Helen Thomas, at United Press International. Helen Thomas picks up. Martha starts talking fast. She says, "Helen, they are throwing my husband to the wolves. I am going to leave him until he gets out of this campaign." Helen is furiously taking notes. Martha is about to spill everything she knows about Creep, McCord, and the dirty tricks. But then, the door to Martha's hotel room violently swings open. Steve King bursts into the room. He realizes what she's doing. "Get away from the phone!" he yells. Martha screams. On the other end of the line in Washington, D.C., Helen Thomas hears Martha Mitchell yell, "Get away! Get away from me!" Helen hears a scuffle. She hears a heavy thud, and then the line goes dead. Steve King had run across the room and physically ripped the telephone out of the wall. What happened next is one of the darkest, most twisted moments in American political history. Martha Mitchell, a 53-year-old woman, fought for her life. She tried to run for the door, but King grabbed her. He threw her across the room. He kicked her. Martha managed to break free and tried to escape through the sliding glass door to the balcony, hoping to scream for help. King caught her again. They fought so hard that she suffered massive bruising on her arms, her thighs, and her face. She ended up needing stitches in her hand from the shattered glass of the balcony door. King and his men realized they couldn't physically restrain her forever, so they called a doctor, a psychiatrist who was loyal to the administration. They held Martha Mitchell down on a bed, and this doctor, without her consent, injected her with a massive dose of a powerful tranquilizer. She passed out. They literally drugged a cabinet member's wife to stop her from talking to the press. They held her captive in that room for 4 more days. 4 days! No phone, no outside contact. Just a drugged, battered woman locked in a luxury prison by her own government. When Helen Thomas called the police in California to do a wellness check, the police showed up, spoke to Steve King at the door, and left. King told them it was just a domestic dispute, and the cops believed this man in the suit. Before we get to the devastating aftermath of this kidnapping, do me a favor and support independent history storytelling by hitting that subscribe button. Done it? Awesome. Now let's get back to Martha and how Richard Nixon tried to destroy her mind. When Martha finally managed to get out of California and fly back to New York, she was a wreck. She was traumatized, heavily bruised, and completely isolated. She immediately went to the press. She showed reporters the black and blue marks all over her body. She told them she was held prisoner. She told them her husband and the Nixon administration were involved in a massive criminal conspiracy. And what did the Nixon administration do? Did they deny it? No! They did something much more insidious. They launched a coordinated, highly effective smear campaign to convince the American public that Martha Mitchell had simply lost her mind. Nixon's aides leaked stories to the press that Martha was suffering from a severe psychiatric breakdown. They told journalists off the record that she was a raging alcoholic, that she was mixing pills and booze, and that the kidnapping was just a paranoid hallucination caused by her drinking. And the most heartbreaking part, her husband, John Mitchell, participated in it. John Mitchell, the man she loved, the man she was trying to protect, chose Richard Nixon over his own wife. He publicly resigned from the campaign, claiming he needed to spend time with his family because his wife was unwell. He completely validated the administration's lies. He let the world believe that his wife was a crazy, hysterical drunk. We know this wasn't an accident. Thanks to the White House tapes, we have actual audio of Richard Nixon orchestrating this smear campaign. In one recording, Nixon tells his chief of staff, Bob Hedelman, "The Martha thing. We've got to build that up. Basically, she's got a psychiatric problem." They weaponized her gender and her personality. Because she was a loud, flamboyant woman in the 1970s, it was incredibly easy for a group of powerful men in suits to convince the country that she was just a hysterical bitch. The press, the same press that used to love her, turned on her. They printed the administration's lies. They treated her like a joke, a punchline on late-night television. Martha Mitchell was screaming the truth from the rooftops, and the entire country looked at her and said, "Aw, bless her heart, she's crazy." But the truth always has a funny way of clawing its way out of the dirt. Over the next 2 years, the Watergate scandal slowly unraveled. Woodward and Bernstein followed the money. John Dean flipped. The secret White House tapes were revealed. And piece by piece, the American public realized the horrific truth. Martha was right. She was right about McCord. She was right about Creep. She was right about the dirty tricks, the cover-up, and the corruption at the very highest levels of government. In 1974, Richard Nixon resigned in absolute disgrace. In 1975, John Mitchell, the husband who betrayed her, was convicted of perjury, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice, and was sentenced to federal prison. Even Richard Nixon himself eventually had to admit it. In his famous 1977 interviews with David Frost, Nixon bluntly stated, "If it hadn't been for Martha Mitchell, there'd have been no Watergate." Nixon claimed that John Mitchell was so distracted by trying to control Martha that he let the Watergate operation slip out of his control. Once again, a man blaming a woman for his own incompetence. But at the very least, an admission of her immense impact. But vindication came at an unimaginably high price. The gaslighting had worked. Her marriage was destroyed. John left her in 1973. She was financially ruined, living alone in New York. The stress, the trauma, and the sheer exhaustion of fighting the most powerful men in the world took a massive toll on her physical health. In 1976, just a few short years after she was proven right, Martha Mitchell died of a rare bone cancer. She was only 57 years old. She died largely alone, estranged from her children, with no money to her name. At her funeral in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, an anonymous supporter sent a massive floral arrangement. It was made of white chrysanthemums, and it spelled out 3 simple words: Martha was right. Martha Mitchell's story was so horrifying, so extreme, that it actually created a brand new term in the field of psychology. It's called the Martha Mitchell effect. The Martha Mitchell effect refers to a situation where a medical professional, like a psychiatrist or a doctor, labels a patient's accurate perception of real events as a delusion, resulting in misdiagnosis. Imagine you go to a therapist and say, "I think my boss is wiretapping my phone, and I think a massive criminal syndicate is following me." A psychiatrist might immediately diagnose you with paranoia or schizophrenia. But what if you're actually right? What if it's genuinely happening? When a doctor believes the abuser or believes the official story over the patient and chemically restrains or institutionalizes someone who is telling the absolute truth, that is the Martha Mitchell effect. It is the ultimate weaponized, medically sanctioned form of gaslighting. And it is named after the woman who endured it on a national scale. Martha Mitchell was a flawed person. She was chaotic, she was messy, she struggled with alcohol, and she loved the drama. But she was also incredibly brave. When she saw something that was wrong, she didn't quietly accept it like the men around her expected her to. She screamed it from the mountaintops. She fought literally tooth and nail against the most powerful, corrupt political machine in American history. And for her bravery, she was kidnapped, beaten, drugged, and had her reputation dragged through the mud. But history remembers. They tried to bury Martha Mitchell under a mountain of bullshit. They tried to write her off as a crazy, hysterical woman. But the truth survived. Martha wasn't the crazy one. She was the only sane person in a White House completely infected by madness and corruption. So the next time someone tries to tell you that you're overreacting or that you're being dramatic or that things you know to be true are all in your head, remember the mouth of the South. Remember that sometimes the crazy women are exactly the ones you need to be listening to. Thank you so much for watching Audacious History. Leave a comment below. Who do you think is the modern day Martha Mitchell? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and as always, stay audacious. I'll see you next time.